Yo, 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 how's it going? Welcome to the Eddie V live podcast. I'm your host, Eddie V. Another episode. We are back. I took a week off. To be honest, I was in Catholic Family Land. I had never heard of it before, but I was there. It was good. It was interesting. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but it is based on Our Lady of Fatima stuff, whom I love. So it was good. But I'm happy to be back here with you today. We're going to be talking about more about elite human capital. I am almost finished going through it, and I'll share with you as much as I think is helpful from it. But we're going to continue with that today. It's not that long, but it might take me a couple more episodes to finish, which is okay. And then I'll briefly mention just some more stuff from Fulfillment of All Desire. Kind of interesting interplay between the two. So we'll see how that goes. And before we get into those topics for the day, I did want to talk about just something that I was thinking about from Elite Human Capital and some of the things I've been seeing online. First of all, it just seems, and maybe this is an online phenomenon, I don't really meet a lot of people. I guess I do meet people in real life, but you don't really get into that deeper layer of what they truly believe. But online, it seems to be that, like, I don't even know what you would call it, maybe paganism or hedonism or something is growing rapidly. It seems, I'm not sure, but it seems to me. So people are, and a lot of it has to do with the current situation with male female relationships, because a lot of, I don't know how it is on the girls side, I guess I'll admit that, but I maybe I've had a little exposure to that, but on the male side it's becoming apparent that it's insanely difficult to find a good woman. And I know that word good is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, but just a woman that, voice crack, just a woman that will not cheat on you, divorce you, and steal all of your things. Which hopefully, if you're dating a Catholic woman, that won't happen, but it does happen, and we've talked about this before, I believe. But because of this kind of despair around that, because marriage, family life, having a woman you can trust for a man is a huge part of life. I think that's common sense, and if you disagree, we can argue that. But it does seem to be a huge part of life, that intimacy, that specific intimacy that is different than male friendships, even though I think male friendships can be trend healthier in the overall. But the husband-wife relationship is very distinct, and it brings with it a lot of power and meaning and intimacy. But the inability for young men to find that in the current day has kind of created like this kind of these musings. We're supposed to be a Christian society, but obviously it's crumbling. And so I see a lot of people saying like men should sleep around and all this stuff. And there's other comments, prenups and all that. And those are separate discussions. But when you have these like influencers talking about this, and this is what I'm most afraid of for the young men, is that you have to ask a first question about all this stuff. Because a person, like I saw a woman influencer say the other day, she's like, what is the purpose of a man saving himself for marriage? That's like a really dumb thing for him to do. And if like there was no afterlife, I guess that would be a dumb thing to do. But the first thing you have to ask, if you're a young man, a young woman, any person really, is that seeing it first, you have to recognize the fact that you're going to die. That's the first thing you have to do. And I think I talk about it all the time. And when you understand that every single person has the same ending guaranteed to them, you have to live your life based on that. So you have to look at that first. So don't just start going and doing something crazy or something countercultural without asking about the end. Is there something after this life? Will things I do in this life affect that? Is there nothing after this life? So when you're talking about like, should I mean, this is what they were talking about. This is why I'm using this subject. Oh, I should just sleep around. Nothing matters. Ask the first questions first, which these influencers and these the media, mainstream media, influencers, social media, they're not going to ask that question for you usually because they just want your attention. They just want money. So if there's any young men out there, especially, but young women too, it's like, what is your life for? You are going to die. So let's think about that first. Think about what is all of reality. Just think, I guess, a little bit. So I was seeing a lot of that, and it was just a little frustrating. And I just want to scream at everyone. And I wish someone had screamed at me when I was younger. It's like, let's think about death first, because it's guaranteed to you. And then from that, we can think about life and how we should live it. Anyway, I was thinking about that, and I'll probably talk about that more in the future. It's just important. You should think about death every day. I honestly think, and I get a lot of pushback about this from Catholics, Christians, irreligious people. They're like, oh, it's so morbid. That's so depressing, blah, blah. I'm like, those people are scared of death, and that's not good. Even people that claim they're not scared of death, they're like, I don't want to talk about it. Don't talk about it in front of me. It's like, we need to talk about it. I think you should be thinking about death every day. That helps you live, keeps the end in mind. Where is this physical body heading? Where is my life heading? It's ending in a wood box under the ground. So you got to live it in correspondence with that and live it according to what happens after that, because this is a temporary existence. Anyway, you probably already know that, but I just want to mention that. Let's get into elite human capital. I just wanted to mention a couple of things we already talked about before, because I just think these are so important. This guy is just trying to get specifically young men on the right track. And I think a lot of the stuff he says, I wish I had when I was 16 years old, would have been a whole different ballgame. One thing I'm going to mention again, he talks about is sports betting is the scourge of young men. Do not do it. It's been legalized recently in the US, and it's just been doing damage. And why has it been introduced? It's for money. It's for the sake of money. People want to get rich. They know they can get people addicted to this betting market, and it's worked to their advantage and to the detriment of many young men, whether it's debt, suicide, just negatively impacting their finances. It's kind of crazy, the suicide rate on sports betting. You can look that up for yourself, but just stay away from it. Also, there's the fact, just to further encourage you not to do this, that a lot of the people there are people in sports that have the inside scoop. So you are getting screwed, regular person that doesn't have that inside scoop. And people that have the inside scoop are making boatloads of money. So you are, not only is it dumb in general, but you're in a controlled environment where you are the loser. So just don't do it. Another thing was stocks. I'm not a huge fan of stocks. I'll say that again, but I don't think the church speaks against it. It speaks against speculation. You can find that in Centesimus Annus from John Paul II. But as far as stocks go, I'm against it personally, but I'm not going to tell young men they can't do that, though I would not like them to. But this guy is obviously not against. This is just my notes. This guy's obviously not against stocks, but he would say, and he says in his white paper, that if you're going to do stocks, don't be a cowboy. You don't know anything. Just, stick with the market. You'll get your return consistently year after year, and you don't have to think you're a day trader or something. So that's the last thing I want to say about that. And then the last thing review is credit cards. Don't do it. If you are a person who has a bunch of debt, you don't know how to manage your finances, you are struggling, you are drowning, do not do the credit cards. Use This guy talks about use cash, use debit. And he talks about a specific thing I like with finances, that when you take directly from your bank account, you see that every day. It like hits and it hurts. As with the credit card, you don't see it for a month, right? It's a delayed pain, I guess you could call it. So you got to make the executive decision. And he talks about literally cut the credit card in half, like right now. Don't put anything else on it. Obviously, there's emergency situations that you might have to use your rational faculties, but you really need to get rid of that thing. And it's designed to like get you in the hole. The percentages on these things are crazy. The credit card companies are smarter than you. They're going to get you screwed. So unless you're rich and you can afford to pay it off consistently every month, do not do it. And even if you can afford to do it, it doesn't really benefit you that much. You get points and rewards and stuff, but if you really look at those, you don't really get a lot out of it. You do get something out of it, but you don't get a lot, and the risk is way higher than the reward. So, no credit cards, especially if you're trying to get back in the game. Cars are bad. I think I talked about this before, but when you're getting a car, do not get a new car. Do not get a fancy car. Young men, get a, doesn't have to be like super cheap, but just get a nice, good, plain car that will get you from point A to point B. Don't try to impress women. Don't try to impress your friends. Just get the thing that will get you to point A to point B. Cars are a money pool, money. What would you call it? A money drain. They just drain money. So just get the minimum thing you need. Reliable, but the minimum thing you need. Used cars, you can get a good one from $5,000 to $15,000 easily. There's no reason you should be spending more than that. Even in this crazy economy we have now, you can get them pretty cheap. I'll say my car, it's been going great. Older car, no problems. Hopefully continue to do that. Got it for $8,000. Paid for cash. Good to go. You don't need anything fancy. And if a girl's really needs to see your fancy car to be impressed with you, like that's probably not the right girl. Because these car loans will screw you over. It'll take like 20 to 40% of your monthly income. And this guy talks about that too. So just don't do it. No new cars. If you buy a new car, if I see someone with a new car, I'm like, that's not a serious person, or they're a billionaire or a millionaire. He talks about investing. I'm not going to talk about this a lot because I'm not super into this stuff. Some aspects I'm actually against, but he talks about the 401k, which if you are trying to make a lot of money for later in life, this just makes sense. The 401k was made because companies stopped doing pensions and people needed retirement money. So this guy, I forgot his name, he's still alive, but he made this concept of the 401k to help people retire. What else? Again, with the 401k, you want to do broad market indexes. You don't want to get fancy. You don't know anything. So just don't do the fancy thing. Just do the broad market. It'll take you there. I personally recommend for retirement stuff. I know this is kind of out there, but I recommend your children, if you have children, if you're good to them, they'll want to take care of you. I want to take care of my parents. I don't want to give them a luxurious life, but I'll take care of them. And also, I think a business is probably the best thing. Having a business, owning a business, and being able to pass that down or sell it when you get older is like the real. I think that just makes sense. Obviously, it's not perfect, but I recommend those as potential alternatives to 401ks and stuff like that. I'm not against saving. I'm against the stock market, which involves other stuff. Then he talks, this is the part I really enjoyed. He talked about cash. So it's different. You have your investment stuff and you have cash. And I just talked about retirement, but you have investment stuff in terms of non-retirement. And that's the company, which is both investment and retirement potentially. But he talks about cash, which is the stuff, it's not the stuff that you need for retirement or investment. And it's not the stuff you need for your daily expenses. It's just stuff hanging around. And I do have some of that, and maybe you have some of that, and he talks about the best ways to do that. He says a mutual fund, which is going to involve the stock market, obviously, which is going to be a little more, it's not risky, but it's more risky than the other option he gives. And again, you're going to put it into broad stock market, ETF or something, nothing crazy, right? You don't know anything. I don't know anything. This is what this guy recommends. And then also a high yield savings account. And so for him, he says a high yield should be 3 to 5% savings account. And this is a savings account you can access immediately. So I forgot to mention with the 401k, the reason I don't like it for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is that it's your money, but you cannot take it out until a certain age. I think now, I forgot. I think it's 62 or 65 without incurring a massive penalty. And I actually did this in my younger years. I don't know if I should have. I'm proud I did it, but it really hurt. So for these things, I don't like that, because especially if you're a young guy, I think you need the cash, because if there's something that's great to do, some sort of business opportunity, entrepreneurship, or just something you believe in and you want to move on it quick, you don't want to have hundreds of thousands of dollars in your 401k that you can't access without a huge penalty if you want to do something really cool that will, help your family or be really good business or make a huge impact in your society. I feel like you need to have that movement. So with the high yield savings account, you're getting your money back for inflation, right? You're combating inflation. I still think it sucks because the stock market is still involved in that. But I like this better because you can access it within a day. So you could have a bunch of money in there. You're getting 3 to 5%. And there are still banks that do this. They still have the 3 to 5% yield on it per year, which is helping you with inflation, but you can access it at any moment. Not to mention, I think it might be contributing to inflation, but that's a whole nother. So I really recommend that. The mutual fund too, because you can access that pretty quickly. It might be longer than a day for the mutual fund. But yeah, if an opportunity comes up, especially young men, and you've got that money, you want to access it for a business or something, I think that's really important. And yeah, obviously for this stuff, you're probably like 401k, you're probably doing the company match. If you do have that, you can make a lot of money, obviously, for when you're older. I don't like it, but just to be honest, that's how you make a lot of money for when you're an old person. That there's no getting around it. You will make a lot of money from that. So that's that. I recommend, I don't like the 401k, but I do understand it helps you avoid taxes. It's a lot of money. Your employer contributes to it. I say don't do it, but I don't know if I have all Catholics watching. If you're a Catholic, I'm like, don't do it. But the church hasn't explicitly talked against this, so I can't say for sure. I just have a feeling, and I've done a lot of research on it. But anyway, I really, if you need a place to put your money, a high yield savings account is a pretty good place. You will beat inflation. But again, this is not investment. This is not retirement. This is cash that you can access immediately. And he talks about it. If your cash is just sitting in a checking account, which ideally you could just do that and it wouldn't depreciate. But the way our economy works, like, I don't know, like $100 in 100 years is going to be worth nothing at this rate. And the Iran war, all these major world economic stuff is not going to help that for sure. So just being honest with you, I have my ideas, but just being honest. And will say, there's a great book called Happy Are You Poor, which talks about obviously money and possessions. I recommend it. It's by Father Thomas Dubay. But he mentions that even Elizabeth Ann Seton, she had a savings account with a annual yield. So that makes me feel a little better about the savings accounts. But you're going to have to make your own decisions. But it is kind of interesting. We love St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. And then he briefly talks about, he says you don't need a professional advisor unless you're making over 200, or unless you have over $250,000 of cash lying around. I don't think there's going to be a lot of people watching this. If you do have that, I guess if you want an advisor, go for it. I don't really think you need it unless you're getting like crazy buka bucks. So just think about that. Real estate. This is the interesting thing, and I really appreciate his take on this because I think I was a little misled in my younger years, even though I didn't make the mistake. But he says real estate is not what people think it is. It is not going to be a good long-term investment. And he talks about why. He says the regular thing we're taught is that, you go to college, you get a job, and you get married, and you buy a house, or in some orders. So you'll probably be owning a house by like mid-20s, late 20s. And he says that's not necessarily a great idea because when you buy a house, it really impedes your movement, especially if you're younger. And for me, I'm just like, okay, maybe yes or no. But yeah, there are some cities in this country now, and it's getting worse, unfortunately, where like you get stuck there and it's just not a good place to live and no one wants to buy your house. So you have a 200,000, 300,000 lump just sitting there that you can't cash in on and you want to move somewhere else. So just be wary of that. You don't have to buy a house. You're going to die. It would be nice. I think it's nice to have a house later in life, especially. And it's something you can pass down, but we don't really do that anymore where it's like you're going to live in the same place. I would prefer that, but the way the economy moves now, you have to be able to pick up and go, it seems, on a dime, which is not great. I agree it's not great. If you can stay in the same place as your folks, I think it's a good thing. But it's not always accessible to people. He also talks about the rent to home price ratio. If you don't have a lot of money, you don't have a good job, you don't want to buy a house, because if you're buying a house, the mortgage could be taking 50% of your monthly income. And if you have that dragging you down, you're not going to be able to move like you need to move. Business opportunities, career opportunities, family opportunities. You're going to have 50% being dragged down every month, and especially with the mortgage rates right now, you're spending a bunch of money. It's just flying away. So he says if you can do a rent to price of a house, price of a mortgage ratio, and just real quick and see how bad that is, usually I think you're going to see, like, I live in Arizona, so it's so terrible right now. So the rent is terrible. So you might actually be better buying here sometimes in some situations. But other places, the rent can be dirt cheap. So think about that. And renting, you can have roommates. So yeah, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So he's talks about things that you need to place in this rent to price ratios. Like, are you planning to stay a long time in this place? Right? Is it just it was just a job move or a temporary stay? Obviously, college, education, stuff like that. You don't want to buy, obviously. Are there other ways you can use your money? If you're renting, but you can use your money for a business, maybe don't buy that house. Just rent at that moment. And then what was this one I wrote? Oh, forced sale. So if you think you'll be coming into a situation where you have to sell for less because you have to move fast, how much is that going to hurt you? And that could determine whether you want to buy or not. So all right, so that's that. A lot of the things you need to consider before buying. But then this is what I really enjoyed from him. He talks about how no matter if you buy or if you rent, you should not live alone. Living alone is bad for many reasons. Morally, financially, etc. If you rent, have roommates. You can split that rent. If you buy a house, get some roommates. If you're married, obviously that'll be more difficult. But if you're single, you buy a house, get some roommates. It's inconvenient to have roommates. I understand that, but they will help you with the cost of the rent or the mortgage. And in a Catholic perspective, if you're living alone, you can just do whatever you want, and that is not a good place to be in. That is not a place for virtue building. And it's funny, this guy doesn't even talk about that, but he talks about, is like, really need to learn to live with other people. So like, don't live alone. That's an insane position that really no time in your life where you're doing things as correctly will you be living alone. Right? You're born into a family usually, and you're not living alone. So you have to learn to deal with other people. You go to school, you're not alone dealing with other people. College, you're not alone. Family life, you get married, you're not alone. You either have a wife or you have a wife and kids. At church, you're not alone. And at work, you're not alone. So the idea that living alone is going to help you, it's going to hurt you financially, and it's also going to hurt you, I think, with virtue and vice. And there's not another person that is going to walk in, you do it anyway. It's a lot of stuff. I don't recommend it. And this guy does not recommend it from a financial perspective. He talks about loans a lot. I'm not going to get into that, but it is important to understand that stuff. I know it's annoying. It is kind of annoying, but it's important to understand that stuff. And then he says also with houses, the maintenance is crazy. And he kind of goes through a couple of potential situations where that is insane. And it is true. I just had a buddy, I hope you'll probably watch this. I had a buddy who talks about how he just had like a water heater like last year go out. It's a lot of money and it can cause a lot of damage. So if you can't afford to have a pretty substantial, house emergency fund, you should not be buying a house. If you're going to have to go into credit card debt to own a house, you probably are not ready for a house. So make sure you have some sort of lucrative wealth before you're getting into that, especially doing that rent price ratio that I talked about. And then he talks about here, I put in my notes, houses are for high net worth people. So you got to wait until you're at that or, building towards that. And it's houses are not like an economic boon for you. Houses are nice. It's nice to own your own home, but it's more of a luxury now. Back in the day when you had cheap houses, it wasn't a luxury. Now it's a luxury that is really only smart for people that have a pretty solid income. And what does that income stand at? I like to say like 70, 80,000 a year. Some people say over 100,000, six figures. And I think they might be right with how bad the economy is getting. And it's only going to get worse, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. And then he talks about HSA and Roths. You should look into that. I'm not going to look at that. I don't invest in that stuff. But if your sole thing is just to get rich, those things will help you a lot. if you're more concerned in the Catholic life, living a moral life, not getting addicted to money, I recommend staying away from that stuff. And of all those things, I personally only have a savings account, the high yield savings account, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I feel more comfortable with it. So that's the final part of this section of the white paper. We're going to get into kind of the second to last section, or the last section, which is he's going to split up into age groups, which I think is really cool. And he gives some great advice for it. So we're going to kind of go through the age groups that he breaks up, and we'll talk about what he recommends for that. So we're almost done with it. Probably one or two more episodes of this. I hope you're enjoying it. I wish I had this when I was 16. It would have made a lot of different moves. But got to help the younger people out, the younger fellas especially, but also just anyone who wants to hear. So that's that. And then I want to briefly talk about detachment. So we're moving into this section of fulfillment of all desire where he's talking about detachment. And the first thing is kind of funny in coordination with the elite human capital. He talks about detachment from money and possessions. And I don't know how much I enjoy how he talks about it. He doesn't really cite the saints too much on this, but so I'll just kind of riff. But this is a huge thing to be detached from. When you read the Gospels, especially with our Lord, one of the big things he's talking about, he's not talking about like sexual morality a lot. He's not talking about murder and stuff a lot. The thing he's talking about a lot that comes up consistently is money and possessions. If you read the Gospels, this is the thing he's really warning people of. Putting your trust in money, caring so much about, clothing for them, it's clothing, shelter, food, power related to money. He's really warning against this. So I do warn anyone, in relation to this elite capital, I want people to be successful, to contribute to society, and be movers and shakers and powerful people. But you also have to be careful. Money, as I think St. Paul says, the love of money is the root of all evil. So you can get really addicted to the power of money because you hand someone money and you get something magically. You get a house, you get people running around for you, people doing stuff for you. So it can seem like magic. And if you really want more conversation on this, you should look up the New Polity guys and their Good Money episodes. Really good stuff. But yeah, you have to be careful with money, and then possessions too. They can really, it's okay to have possessions. You should really, if you're Catholic, you should be operating with what you need mostly. And St. Paul talks about this in his letters. Is like we really are trying to do only with what we need. And the reason for this is like we're going to die and we can get addicted to possessions. And possessions can tie us down. If the Lord asks us to do something, we're like, oh, I have to get rid of this. I have to get rid of that. You're not really open to the Lord speaking to you. So you need to be very careful. It's not saying you can't have possessions. I have a fancy computer here. I got a camera here, and this is so I can do this podcast. But if the Lord asks me to do something, I'm not willing to get rid of these things, or I'm scared of getting rid of these things. I'm scared of losing money. That's not a good position to be in. So you got to be free from that stuff. And St. Paul also talks about you need to learn both ways. And this is maybe something I don't talk about with a lot of people because it's not really their problem. Their problem is the poverty, not the riches. But if you have riches, you need to be able to live with that and operate with that correctly. And if you're poor, you need to be able to operate with that. So whatever the Lord gives to you, whether he gives you, and he's really giving it to you, right? Nothing happens without the Lord willing it. If he allows you to have wealth, you need to be able to operate with that correctly. If he allows you to become poor, you need to operate with that correctly. So being able to thrive and to be deprived, I guess, for lack of a better word, excuse me, you need to be able to operate. So it cuts both ways. So while, hopefully you're trying to become elite human capital, you need to be thinking about like, where's my heart at? If this is kind of a silly thing, but if your car gets robbed and your clothes get stolen or your iPad gets stolen, are you losing it? Are you freaking out? Are you angry? Are you yelling? Are you just like, not great. I didn't want that to happen, but God's will be done and you're good. So be thinking about that. And there's a lot more with money. It gets complicated, but I think the main thing is, operating with what we need, operating for the glory of God, not getting too attached to the possessions we have, different things like that. And some of that maybe seem obvious, but this is also connected to the spiritual life. Like as you're able to detach from these things, you're actually able to grow in the spiritual life. these things aren't affecting your peace, you can grow closer to God. So, bada bing, bada boom. But that's all I have today. I think I'll stop there. That's all I have for today. So please like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think about the show. I would like some more comments. I do get some feedback, but it's not on the channel, which is okay. But yeah, just if you have anything you want to say, comment it over there. But that's all I got today, I believe. Yes. So God bless you. God keep you. And I will see you on the next one. Goodbye.